Hi, this is the third video in a multi-part series about the phantom time hypothesis. If you're interested in the subject and you've not seen my previous entries, then I highly recommend you check those out before watching this one. Links to those videos are in the description. Now let's begin. When Heribert Illig in the 1990s developed the theory known as the phantom time hypothesis, according to which nearly 300 extra fictitious years were added to the historical timeline since the birth of Christ, he did this without having any knowledge that the Hungarian medieval chronicles actually support his theory. In this video, we will take a look at 4 of these books and the dates and chronology of events presented in them throughout the lens of the phantom time hypothesis, because what is written in them differs quite a bit from the official version of events. These books are the following: the Jesta Hungarorum by Simone of Kitzai, the Chronicum Pictum by Kalti Mark, the Chronica Hungarorum by Thoroci János, and the Rerum Hungaricarum Decades from Antonio Bonfini. The history of the Hungarians presented in these books is roughly the following. The people known as the Huns and Hungarians are one and the same, and they originate from Scythia. One day the Hungarians invade the Carpathian Basin, which at the time is ruled by the Roman Empire. This is what the chronicles call the first arrival of the Hungarians. In the ensuing battles, 2 Roman emperors die. After this, the Hungarians elect Attila, also known as Attila the Hun, as their king, who appoints his brother Buda as the governor of the Eastern territories. Attila then subjugates the Eastern Roman Empire and marries the daughter of the Eastern Roman Emperor. After that, a certain Dietrich of Verona, who is perhaps one of the former Roman emperors or the son of one, persuades Attila to attack the western half of the Roman Empire. Attila does so and invades Gaul. On the plains of Catulunum, a Roman army led by Flavius Aetius stands in his way. Attila manages to defeat them, or at least bring out the battle to a draw. Afterwards, he conquers a significant part of Gaul, and then returns to the Carpathian Basin. After that, he invades Italy, reaches Rome, goes home, and then dies at his wedding due to a nosebleed. After Attila dies, a war breaks out between 2 of his sons, Cassaba and Aladar. Cassaba's mother is the daughter of the Eastern Roman Emperor, while Aladar's mother is a German sovereign called Kriemhild. Aladar is mostly supported by the Germans, while Cassaba is mostly supported by the Hungarians. Cassaba loses the succession war, and he flees first to Constantinople to his grandfather, then back to Scythia. He is the ancestor of Arpad, who leads the Hungarian tribes during the invasion of the Carpathian Basin, which the chronicles call the Second Arrival. So that's roughly the history of Hungarians in the late antiquity and early medieval era according to our chronicles. Of course, they are not taken seriously by modern academic history, and the reason for that is the fact that dates given for these events differ significantly from the official one. Now let's go through these books one by one in chronological order. We'll start with the Gesta Hungarorum. The book was written around the year 1283 AD by Simone of Kitzai, about whom we do not know much apart from his name and that he was probably a priest. The strange things begin right at the beginning of the book, because Kitzai writes the following about the first arrival. During the 6th age of the world, the Hungarians in Scythia, like the grass, became numerous. In the year of our Lord 700, they came together and elected captains or leaders among their ranks. So Kitzai says that the first arrival, which is the Hunnic invasion of Pannonia, happened around the year 700. This event supposedly happens during the life of Attila. However, according to the official version, at this point Attila was dead for around 250 years. After the Huns or Hungarians arrived to the Carpathian Basin, they settled near the river Tisza. Kitzai writes the following. Back then, Pannonia, Pamphylia, Phrygia, Macedonia, and Dalmatia were ruled by the Tetrarch Macrinus, who was from the city of Sabaria from the Longobarд nation. The Tetrarchs were the emperors of the Roman Empire during the period when the Roman Empire was ruled by 4 emperors at once. The system was introduced by Emperor Diocletian in 293 when he appointed 3 other men as co-emperors. This system, however, only lasted a couple of years until the year 305, or 324 depending on how you count it. So, if the first arrival took place during the age of the Tetrarchy, then it must have happened sometime between 293 and 324, and not in the 700s. Officially, however, Attila was not even yet alive during the time of the Tetrarchy. Let's move on. Keatsai goes on to write that Macrinus asks for help from a Roman king called Dietrich of Verona because the Hungarians started looting along the border. So Dietrich gathers his army and rushes to the aid of Macrinus. They set up their camp somewhere in Pannonia along the Danube River. I assume that this name Dietrich might actually be his title, Tetrarch. By the way, his figure also shows up in German stories as well, but more about him later. The Hungarians crossed the Danube River during the night and they ambushed the Romans, but the Romans managed to put the Hungarians to flight. This battle is referred to as the Battle of Tarnok Valley by the Chronicles. Despite their victory, the Romans suffer heavy losses and they decide to withdraw from the battlefield. The Hungarians later followed them and clashed with the Romans for a second time at the place called Szesonmór. Keatsai writes about this battle in the following way. From morning to noon, the battle was so fierce and furious that the glorious Hun captains Bela, Reva, and Kadoxa fell with 40,000 men, whose bodies were also brought back to the aforementioned stone idol and buried next to their comrades. Macrinus also fell that day, and as many more German princes, Dietrich was mortally wounded by an arrow which hit him in the forehead, and the entire Western army was captured or lay dead. So, there is a battle where it seems that two Roman emperors, Macrinus and Dietrich, die. If this is true, then Roman or Greek sources should also report this event somewhere as well. Well, Greek sources write about the Battle of Arbutus, which probably happened somewhere near the marshes of the Danube in 251. In this battle, the Roman legions led by the Roman emperors Trajan Decius and Herennius Etruscus clashed against the Gothic and Scythian army led by a Gothic chieftain named Cniva. The Romans lose this battle, and the two Roman emperors die during it. These two battles are very similar in this regard, but there's a 450-year difference between them. Another strange coincidence is that in the year 305, during the age of the Tetrarchy, suddenly two Roman emperors retire, Diocletian and Maximian. Allegedly, Diocletian does this so he can raise cabbage in his garden. How realistic is the fact that a Roman emperor just retires, let alone two in the same year, and one of them does this so that he can do farming? The similarity between the name Macrinus and Maximian is probably not a coincidence either. If you ask me, the Battle of Szesonmór, the Battle of Arbutus, and the retirement of Diocletian and Maximian are the same event. They just drifted away from each other on the timeline. Moreover, I assume that Diocletian and Maximian died in battle, and their retirement was made up later. Let's move on. After the Battle of Szesonmór, the Hungarians elect Attila as their king. Keatsai writes that Attila later held a meeting in Savani, where several German chieftains and kings came to pledge allegiance to him. There, Dietrich of Verona also shows up, who at this point is no longer emperor and apparently managed to survive the arrow to his head. But it is also possible that the Hungarians confused one tetrarch with another, or the successor of one. In any case, Dietrich advises Attila to march against the western regions of the Roman Empire, to which Attila agrees. And so, Attila gathers his armies, and after conquering Illyria, he crosses the Rhine at Constance, continues his journey north following the river, defeats the army of a certain King Sigismund at Basel, and then takes the city of Strasbourg. This Sigismund Keatsai writes about is probably the King Sigismund of Burgundy. The problem is, of course, that they were not contemporaries, because according to the official chronology, Sigismund was born about 20 years after Attila's death. But let's move on. Attila then crosses into Gaul, where he sends part of his army into Hispania against a certain sultan. The question arises, how could Attila send an army into Spain against an Arab ruler if the Arab expansion does not reach Spain until 200 years after Attila's death? Western sources also report on the Spanish campaign, but they do not assign it to the Huns. The Wikipedia article writes the following about the year 409. The Vandals, led by King Gunderic, crossed the Pyrenees into the Iberian Peninsula. This happens 42 years, or almost a Julian calendar era difference, before Attila's campaign in Gaul, and the Vandals don't do this alone. They are accompanied by Suebians and Alans. The Suebians are obviously a Germanic people, however, the Alans are considered to be Hunnic by academia. After that, Attila finds himself facing a Roman army on the plains of Catalunum, led by a patrician named Aetius and 10 Western kings. Attila tries to buy time to recall the part of his army sent to Hispania by sending envoys to Aetius, but the Romans are not fooled by him, and they force Attila to battle. Simon of Kyzai writes the following about the battle. In which battle Alderic, the king of the Goths, falls miserably, whose death, as soon as the other kings find out, they start fleeing. From that day on, the spirits of the Hungarians and King Attil rose up, and fear gripped the earth, and upon hearing this, several countries submitted to them. Based on this, it seems that Attila won the Battle of Catalunum, which he loses officially, or maybe it was just bias on Kyzai's part. Anyway, Kyzai claims that after the battle, Attila conquers a significant part of Gaul, after which he goes home, invades Italy a few years later, reaches Rome, goes home again, and then dies on his wedding night. After his death, a succession war breaks out between 2 of his sons, Aladar and Cassaba. In his chronicle, Simon of Kyzai writes one other interesting piece of information, namely, regarding the second arrival of the Hungarians. Simon of Kyzai puts the date of this event at 872, while according to mainstream history, it happened in 895. The difference between these two dates is exactly 23 years, which is exactly the same as the difference between the ancient Greek era, which counts the years from the first Olympic Games, and the ancient Roman era, which counts the years from the foundation of Rome. Now let's look at the next book, the Chronicum Pictum, which was written around 1360 on the orders of King Louis the Great by the priest Kalti Mark. Kalti begins the chapter, The First Arrival of the Hungarians, with the following line. In the 373rd year from the incarnation of the Lord, during the time of Emperor Valens and Pope Colistinus I of the Roman Church, in the 6th era of the world, the Hungarians living in Scythia multiplied. Then they decided to push into the western lands. So Kalti puts the first arrival of the Hungarians in the year 373, or at least the preparations for that campaign. Officially, nothing happens in the year 373, which is in any way similar to the invasion of Pannonia. However, in the year 374, something does happen. According to Wikipedia, in 374, the Quades cross the Danube River and start plundering the province of Pannonia. The story continues as we saw in the Jesta Hungarorum, and the Hungarians fight 2 battles with the Roman army led by Macrinus and Ditra of Verona. They lose in the Battle of the Tarnac Valley, but they manage to win in the Battle of Sison Moor, where Macrinus dies and Ditra of Verona is hit in the head by an arrow. Kalti Mark gives the location of this battle, somewhere near what's today's Vienna. Well, there is a battle that fits this description, namely the so-called Battle of Carnuntum, which happened in 168 or 170 within the framework of the First Marcomannian War, and it took place near Vienna. Here, the Roman legions fight against an army of Marcomanni and Quadi, those Quadis who, according to the mainstream history, invaded Pannonia in 374, exactly when the first arrival of Hungarians took place according to Kalti. The Romans lose this battle. Another parallel is that the Romans are led by Marcus Aurelius, who is probably the same individual as the Macrinus mentioned in the Hungarian Chronicles. By the way, the battle's Wikipedia page says the following. The chronology of events of the Marcomannic Wars has a number of problems. Another interesting fact is that Marcus Aurelius also dies near Vienna during a campaign, officially due to an illness, but if you ask me, he died in battle. His death marks the beginning of the late Roman period. As I already said, according to Culti, the first arrival of the Hungarians took place during the reign of Emperor Valens. Roman emperors usually have several names, but Emperor Valens only has one. We don't know the names of the dynasty he belonged to, or any of his titles, so I wouldn't be surprised if this Emperor Valens was the same as one of the Emperor Valentians. He just split away from his other self due to the inserted phantom time into the timeline. In any case, I checked if his life showed any correspondence with what chronicles wrote about Dietrich or Macrinus, and it turns out that the way of his death is very similar to how Dietrich died. Wikipedia writes the following about Emperor Valens. A third apocryphal account states that Valens was struck in the face by a Gothic dart and then perished while leading a charge. He wore no helmet in order to encourage his men. Valens's death officially occurred in 378 during the Battle of Adrianople, when he and his army fought against an army of Goths and Alans. Let's move on. Culti Mark says that Attila was elected as king in 401, 28 years after the Battle of Cesson-Moor. Officially, Attila is not even alive at this point. Culti Mark later writes, Attila reigned for 44 years, was a captain for 5, and lived for 124 years. That 44 year again. Is it a coincidence? Probably not. I wouldn't be surprised if Culti found dates for Attila's birth and death from 2 separate sources, which counted the years according to 2 different eras, which led to Attila's extremely long life. Culti Mark goes on to write that after Attila's death, his son Cassaba stayed with his grandfather, Emperor Honorius, for 13 years, and then returned to Scythia. Well, there was only one emperor named Honorius, and he died in 423. The problem is that Attila's official date of death is in 453 or 454. However, since my first video on this topic, we know that the official date of Attila's death is meant to be understood by the Julian calendar era. If we assume that the date of Honorius's death is meant to be understood by Christ era, then we subtract 44 from Attila's date of death to put them on the same timeline, which puts his death into 410, which is exactly 13 years before Honorius dies, which would explain why Cassaba spent 13 years with him in Greece after fleeing there. Moving on, Culti writes the following for the date of the second arrival of the Hungarians. In the 677th year from the incarnation of the Lord, 104 years after the death of the Hungarian king Attila, during the time of Emperor Constantine III and Pope Zacharias, as it is written in the Chronicle of the Romans, the Hungarians came out of Scythia for the second time. Well, this line is interesting to us for several reasons. First of all, let's see if anything happens in 677 that even slightly resembles the history of the Hungarian conquest of the Pannonian Basin, i.e., the second arrival. The answer is yes. According to Wikipedia, in 677, the Onogur Bulgarians, after being defeated by the Khazars, were pushed into the Carpathian Basin, where they settled. This matches the description of the Hungarian conquest of the Pannonian Basin as it was reported by the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII. Just here we have the Onogurs instead of the Hungarians, and Khazars instead of the Pechenegs. Could it be possible that when we read about Onogur Bulgarians in the history books, it should mean Hungarians? According to linguists today, the term Hungary comes from the word Onogur, meaning the names for these two, in theory, separate peoples are basically the same. So, with a difference of about 200 years, 2 peoples with practically the same name take possession of the Carpathian Basin. Returning to what Culti wrote about the second arrival of the Hungarians, neither Emperor Constantine III nor Pope Zacharias were in office in 677, nor were they even contemporaries of each other. Culti Mark also writes that the second arrival, which officially happened in 895, took place 104 years after Attila's death. Well, does anything interesting happen 104 years before 895, i.e. in 791, the year Attila supposedly dies? The answer is yes. In 791, a war breaks out between the Frank Empire, led by Charlemagne, and the Avar Khaganate, which the Frank Empire wins. According to the Hungarian Chronicles, after Attila dies, a war breaks out between Attila's two sons, Kasaba, who is mostly supported by the Hungarians, and Aladar, who is mostly supported by the Germans. Is it possible that this war is the same as the Frank-Avar War? If yes, that would mean Aladar, the son of Attila, is the same person as Charlemagne. Well, there's an interesting coincidence regarding this. Charlemagne initially shared power with his brother Carloman, whom later dies from severe nosebleed, just like Attila. From what Culti Mark writes, another date for conquest of the Carpathian Basin can be derived. Culti puts the year of Attila's death at 445. He then died in the 72nd year of the arrival of the Hungarians in Pannonia, the 445th year of the Lord's incarnation, in the time of Emperor Marcinus II and Pope Gelasius I. If the conquest or second arrival takes place 104 years later, we get 549. Did anything interesting happen in 549 that is in any way, shape, or form resembling the second arrival? The answer is no, but Simon Kisai, whom I mentioned earlier, puts the date of the second arrival at 872. The difference between these two dates is 323 years. In one of my previous videos, I've already presented this diagram, which shows the difference between different eras used in antiquity. If you look at it, you can see that the era which counts the years from the death of Alexander the Great produces dates 323 years larger than those of the Christ era for the same event. Therefore, we can assume that the dates used by Simon Kisai in the Jesta Hungarorum are probably meant to be understood by the Alexander era. That's all I wanted to say about the Chronicum Pictum. Before we move on to the next book, I wanted to say that Dietrich of Verona, whom is mentioned by the Hungarian Chronicles, also appears in Germanic legends under the name Dietrich von Bern. His figure is usually identified with the Gothic king Theodoric the Great. In the legends, Dietrich von Bern, Attila the Hun, and the Gothic king Ermaneric are presented as contemporaries. The only problem is that these three people did not live at the same time according to the official chronology. In these legends, Dietrich von Bern fights against Attila. Furthermore, these legends claim that Attila marries a certain Brumhilda, whom appears on the Hungarian Chronicles under the name Kriemhilda, and from whom Attila's son Aladar is born. Incidentally, the Gothic historian Jordanes tells of an event very similar to the fight between Kasaba and Aladar. Jordanes writes that after Attila's death, the Huns led by his son Elik clashed with the Goths and Gepids led by King Ardaric. Elik and the Huns incidentally lose the war. Let's move on to the next book, the Chronica Hungarorum by Thoroci János, published in 1488. Most of the dates are the same as in the Jesta Hungarorum and the Chronicum Pictum, so there's only one thing which I would like to highlight from it. According to tradition, Saint Ursula and her handmaidens and companions died a martyr's death during the siege of the city of Cologne during their pilgrimage. Historians officially date this event at 383. Thoroci also talks about her death, and he places the event at the time of Attila's Western European campaign, although rather uncertainly. I quote, "The martyrdom of the Holy Virgins is described in several historical works, and although their opinions do not agree on the dates of their death, we can still accept that the martyrdom of the Holy Virgins could have happened during the time of King Attila, since according to tradition, no other Hun army besieged the city of Cologne apart from Attila's army." For me, this quote suggests that Thoroci has sources, which puts the date of St. Ursula's death well before Attila's campaign in Gaul. Let's look at the last book, Rerum Ungaricum Decades by Anton Bonfini, an Italian Renaissance humanist and scholar. He was commissioned by the Hungarian king in the late 15th century to write the history of the Hungarian people, which he finished in 1497. A side note I want to point out really quick is that the decades in the title of this book refers to the division of the book itself, and not a measurement of time. It seems that Bonfini already noticed the strangeness of the time period more than 500 years ago. He writes the following at the very beginning of the 5th decade of Book 1. However, I wonder that the opinion of the writers differs so much in this matter. Destruction of cities by the Huns at this time is mentioned by some before and by some after the Battle of Catalaunum. We will follow the order of events provided by those who wrote most realistically and in detail, since it seems that these were drawn from better and more authentic sources. Moreover, sometimes the difference in time determinations is so great that the history most authentically attested by the war memories appears to be downright false. Bonfini dates the life of the aforementioned Saint Ursula to the time of Pope Pontianus and Pope Anterus. I quote, "When the time came for him to leave, the Pope, inspired by heaven, called the priestly collegium to him, explained what was to be done, and against the opposition of many, resigned the bishopric of Rome, which he had held for a year and about 2 months after Pope Pontianus. The cardinals thought he was mad, that in his old age he joined young ladies as a laughingstock. They did not understand that he was encouraged to do this by a heavenly messenger who told him that he would suffer martyrdom in Gaul together with the maidens. He stuck to his decision, and made the pious and saintly Anterus his successor." The only problem with this account is that according to tradition, Saint Ursula was killed by the Hunnic soldiers during the siege of Cologne, which in theory happened during Attila's Western European campaign. But both Pope Anterus and Pope Pontianus lived in the first half of the 3rd century. These two things are 200 years apart. This contradiction can be explained by Toth-Gyula's phantom time theory, but Bonfini also mentions that the person responsible for the murder was a Roman soldier named Julius, who defected to the Huns, who was hired to commit the murder by 2 Roman generals named Africanus and Maximus, because they were disturbed by the rise of Christianity in the empire. Is it possible that Saint Ursula became a victim of Christian persecution by the Romans, and they later tried to blame it on Hunnic soldiers? Let's move on. Bonfini writes the following about Attila's death. He died in the 72nd year after first arrival, in the 405th year of our Lord. So Bonfini essentially says here that the first arrival of the Hungarians took place in 333. I looked to see if anything similar to the first arrival happened in 333. The answer is no, but 1 year later, in 334, the answer is yes, because that year, the Vandals invaded Pannonia. Let's move on and see what Bonfini says about the second arrival. It is said that about 32 years before Charlemagne destroyed the Longobard Empire in Italy, the Huns, who were then called Hungarians, returned to Pannonia. If we can believe the annals, it happened in the 744th year of our Lord, 304th year after the death of Attila, during the emperorship of Leo's son Constantinople and the papacy of Zacharias. At this point, I think it goes without saying that Bonfini's date for the second arrival takes place 150 years before the official date. There are 2 possibilities. Either the Hungarian chronicles consistently state falsehoods, or there are very serious problems with the chronology of the late antiquity and early medieval time period. If Heribert Illig is right, and the institution of papacy, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Byzantine Empire are responsible for the phantom time, it means that other peoples who were in contact with these states at that period should have anomalies in their history just like the Hungarians, like for example, the peoples of the Middle East and Persia. If I could, I would review the primary historical sources of these people, but I don't know Arabic or Persian. However, in the previous video, a user named Faisail pointed out something interesting in a letter sent by the Prophet Muhammad to the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius. Here's a quote from it. "In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, from Muhammad, servant of Allah and his messenger, to Heraclius, the great leader of the Romans, peace be upon those who follow guidance. To proceed, I invite you to Islam. Accept Islam and you will be safe, and Allah will reward you twice. But if you turn away, upon you will be the sin of the Aryans. O people of the Scripture, come to a word that is just between us and you, that we worship none but Allah, and not associate anything with Him, and not take one another as lords instead of Allah. Then, if they turn away, say, bear witness that we are Muslims." If the official timeline is to be believed, it makes very little sense for Prophet Muhammad to refer to Aryans in this context. However, if Muhammad is the same person as Arius, as I have explained in the previous video, then the whole thing makes much more sense. Another anomaly I stumbled upon comes from a video made by the Historian Craft YouTube channel, namely that there are no Persian sources about the Kidarites, a nomadic people who invaded Sassanid Persia, only foreign ones. Let me play the part.
The actual evidence we have for these groups is, however, fairly sparse, even as the standards of ancient history go. Oftentimes, we are reliant on Roman, Armenian, or Chinese textual sources dating to the period. In other words, not Persian or Indian sources, or we are reliant on Indian texts which date centuries after the events they describe, and whose veracity has sometimes been called into question.
If I had to speculate about the reason for this, I would say that it is possible that the Parthian and Sassanid eras of the Persian history are actually duplications of the same events, which were split from each other due to the insertion of the phantom time into our timeline. But I am not so well versed in Persian history and their primary sources for me to investigate this assumption. That's all I'd like to say in this video. I'm planning 2 more videos on the subject, but I'm not sure if I'll make them considering that these previous 2 videos didn't reach a very large audience. But as always, if you have any questions, feel free to write a comment below or send me an email at the email address listed in the description. And if you've made it all the way to the end of this very long video, thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.